The sun over the Theban necropolis was not the gentle, life-giving star of poetry. It was a hammer of polished brass, beating the world into silent, shimmering submission. The air itself was thick and tasted of dust and millennia. Evelyn Winthrop wiped a grimy hand across her brow, leaving a darker streak on her already dust-caked skin. She stood at the edge of a deep, rectangular cut in the earth, her gaze fixed on the workers below as they carefully shifted baskets of sand and rubble. This was her father's kingdom, a patch of unforgiving desert that held secrets older than empires. Professor Alastair Winthrop was a man woven from the very threads of history he sought to uncover. At 55, he had the lean, weathered look of a desert hawk, his eyes a bright, intelligent blue, perpetually squinting against the sun as if trying to decipher some faint hieroglyph on the horizon. To him, every shard of pottery, every flake of gold leaf, was a syllable in a grand, epic story. "Look at this, Evie," he said, his voice raspy with dust and excitement. He held up a small, blue faience ashapti, a funerary figurine. The paint was chipped, but the serene expression of the servant for the afterlife remained. 18th dynasty without a doubt. The workmanship is exquisite. This tomb, it's different. It feels significant. Evelyn knelt beside him, her practical linen trousers whispering against the sand. At 22, she possessed her father's keen intellect but none of his patience for academic protocol. Her mind was a whirlwind of new theories, of anthropological connections and sociological interpretations that often made her father's more traditional colleagues blanch. Significant, yes, she agreed, taking the ashapti gently. But not just for the treasure. Look at the placement. These aren't royal goods. The symbols here, she traced a faint carving on a nearby limestone block, suggest a high priest perhaps or a vizier. Someone with power but not divine power. We could learn more about the daily functioning of the court, the real people, not just the pharaohs. Alastair smiled, a network of wrinkles fanning from his eyes. Always looking for the story behind the crown, my dear? That is your gift. Their moment of shared discovery was shattered by the crunch of approaching hooves. A cloud of dust announced the arrival of a party on horseback. At its head was a man who sat in the saddle as if it were a throne. Lord Henry Ashford, the expedition's primary patron. He was a study in British rigidity, from the impeccable cut of his khaki jodhpurs to the unyielding line of his jaw. He was young for a lord, perhaps 30, with hair the color of wet sand and eyes of a cool, distant gray, like the North Sea. He dismounted with a fluid, athletic grace that spoke of a life spent on estates and hunting grounds. "Professor Winthrop," he said, his voice a clipped baritone that carried effortlessly in the dry air. He did not acknowledge Evelyn, his gaze sweeping over the dig site with a proprietary air. "Report if you please. My investors are growing restless. They expect returns, not merely academic musings." Alastair's shoulders tightened almost imperceptibly. "My Lord Ashford, we are making excellent progress. The foundation walls are clear, and the artifacts we're uncovering point to a high-status, non-royal burial. The historical value is immense." "Historical value does not fill coffers, Professor," Ashford replied, his eyes narrowing as they finally landed on Evelyn, who had risen to her feet, the ashapti still clutched in her hand. "Miss Winthrop, I see you are assisting." The pause was deliberate, the condescension of physical force in the heat. Evelyn felt a familiar heat that had nothing to do with the sunrise in her cheeks. "I am cataloging the finds, Lord Ashford, and analyzing the iconography. It is crucial work." "I am sure it is," he said, his tone implying the exact opposite. He strode to the edge of the pit, his polished boots scattering pebbles. "I have reviewed the expedition's ledgers. The costs for your workers are excessive. And I see you've ordered another shipment of photographic plates. A frivolous expense when sketches have sufficed for centuries." Evelyn stepped forward, her temper flaring. "Photography provides an unassailable record, my lord. It captures details a human hand might miss. It is the future of archaeology." Ashford turned his gray eyes on her fully, and for a moment she felt pinned by their intensity. "The future, Miss Winthrop, is often an inconvenient distraction from the proven methods of the past. We are here to excavate, not to experiment with expensive toys." The rest of his visit was a tense affair. He questioned every expenditure, criticized the pace, and offered unsolicited advice on worker management, all while exuding an aura of bored superiority. When he and his retinue finally rode away, the silence he left behind was heavier than the desert heat. "Patron or plague, I cannot decide," Evelyn muttered, kicking at a clump of dry earth. "He is the necessary evil, Evie," her father sighed, wiping his spectacles. Without his money, all of this vanishes. The British Museum may fund the glory, but it is men like Ashford who fund the grit. He sees history as a transaction, Evelyn argued, her voice tight with frustration. £1 for a pound of treasure. He doesn't understand the value of the story. Then it is our job to teach him, Alistair said, though he sounded unconvinced. That evening, in the tent that served as their combined study and living quarters, the conflict came to a head. Ashford had invited himself to review the day's findings. He stood over the long trestle table where the artifacts were laid out, his presence making the spacious tent feel claustrophobic. Evelyn was explaining her theory about the tomb's occupant, pointing to a series of symbols on a fragmented stele. The repetition of this sesh glyph, combined with this depiction of the weighing of the heart, suggests he was a scribe of the highest order, a master of secrets. He would have been the keeper of royal annals, privy to. Fascinating speculation, Ashford interrupted, not even looking at her, his attention on a small golden scarab. But what we need is something tangible. Gold, jewels, statuary. Something to justify the next round of funding. My colleagues are not interested in the career of a long-dead bureaucrat. He wasn't a bureaucrat. Evelyn's control snapped. She slammed her field journal shut, the sound like a gunshot in the quiet tent. He was a man of learning and influence. Understanding his life helps us understand the entire machinery of the new kingdom. That is worth more than a room full of gold. Ashford slowly turned his head, his gaze icy. Your passion is noted, Miss Winthrop, but it is misguided. This is not a salon for intellectual ladies to dabble in. This is a business venture with a scientific veneer. You would do well to remember your place. The words hung in the air, toxic and absolute. Your place. Evelyn felt them like a slap. Her father looked pained, caught between his daughter and his patron. Henry, please, Alistair began, but Evelyn was already moving. My place, she said, her voice dangerously low, is wherever knowledge is found. And right now, it is clearly not here, in the company of a man who is as buried in his own prejudices as this tomb is in sand. She turned and strode out of the tent, into the vast, star-dusted Egyptian night, the hot tears of humiliation and rage finally spilling over. The forbidden passion was not yet for the man, but for the fight, a fight for her right to be heard, to be seen as more than just the archaeologist's daughter. The days that followed were a study in strained civility. Evelyn buried herself in her work, spending hours in the tomb shaft, often taking the place of a worker to feel the earth under her own fingernails. She avoided the main camp, taking her meals with the Egyptian foreman Hassan and his family, finding solace in their quiet dignity and their uncomplicated respect for her. It was during one of these solitary sessions, deep in a newly uncovered antechamber, that she found it. The workers had cleared a fall of rock, revealing a narrow hidden aperture behind a false wall. It was too small for most of the men, and her father was busy at the main entrance. I'll go, Evelyn said, her voice echoing in the cramped space. Hassan looked concerned. Said Evelyn, it is not safe. The air may be bad. The stones, they are unstable. I'll be quick, she promised, grabbing an electric torch. Just a look. She had to get on her hands and knees to crawl through the opening. The air on the other side was cool, stale, and carried the faint, sacred scent of cedar and myrrh, preserved for over 3,000 years. Her torch beam cut through the absolute black, illuminating a chamber no larger than a linen closet. It was not a burial chamber. It was a library. Shelves, carved directly into the limestone, held a stack of papyrus scrolls. Their edges were brittle, but they were intact, a miracle in the damp Egyptian soil. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was beyond treasure. This was a voice from the past. In the center of the room, on a small alabaster pedestal, sat a single exquisite piece, a golden bracelet fashioned in the form of a coiled cobra, its eyes 2 chips of deep red carnelian. It was a piece of royal quality. With trembling, reverent hands, she did not touch the scrolls, knowing they could disintegrate at a breath. But she picked up the bracelet. It was heavy, solid, thrumming with a silent history. This was proof. Proof of her bureaucrat's significance. She emerged from the hole, covered in dust but her eyes blazing with triumph. She went straight to her father, who was in a meeting with Lord Ashford, going over the damned ledgers. Father, she said, her voice cutting through their discussion. She held out the bracelet. It gleamed in the tense lamplight, a sliver of captured sunlight. Ashford's head snapped up. His eyes widened, for the first time showing something other than disdain or boredom. It was pure, unadulterated awe. He stood up slowly and walked towards her. "By God," he breathed, reaching out. He took the bracelet from her, his fingers brushing against hers. The contact was electric, a jolt that seemed to short-circuit her anger. His touch was not cold as she had imagined, but warm. He turned the golden serpent over in his hands, his gaze rapt. "Where did you find this?" "In a hidden chamber," Evelyn said, her voice steadier than she felt. "A scribe's library. The papyri are there, untouched. This isn't just a tomb, Lord Ashford. It's an archive. We can read his words. We can know his thoughts." He looked from the bracelet to her face, his gray eyes searching hers. The triumph she felt was now mingled with a confusing, unwelcome thrill at having finally captured his full, undivided, and approving attention. "Show me," he commanded, but the tone was different. It was not an order from a lord to an underling. It was the urgent request of one passionate soul to another. The discovery changed everything. The atmosphere at the dig site shifted from one of tense drudgery to electric anticipation. Under Evelyn's meticulous direction, a team was assembled to carefully extract the papyri. She worked for 16 hours straight, her world narrowing to the fragile scrolls and the painstaking process of preserving them. Ashford, surprisingly, did not leave her side. He fetched water, held lights, and followed her instructions without question or complaint. During a break, as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold, they found themselves alone by the excavation pit. The desert wind had picked up, cool and whispering secrets of its own. "I owe you an apology, Miss Winthrop," Ashford said, his voice low. He was not looking at her, but at the distant cliffs where the tombs of the kings lay hidden. "I was dismissive. I failed to see the value in your approach. This discovery, it is more significant than any cache of jewels." "You were right." The admission was so unexpected, so utterly disarming, that Evelyn could only stare at him. The stubborn, traditional lord was humbling himself before her. "Thank you," she managed. "The scrolls, when we translate them, they will tell us more than any single object ever could." He turned to her then, and the fading light softened the hard lines of his face. "You are unlike any woman I have ever met. You have the mind of a scholar and the courage of a soldier." "I have simply had the opportunity to use my mind," she replied, her heart beating a strange, frantic rhythm. "Most women are not so fortunate." "No," he agreed, a shadow crossing his features. "They are not." He hesitated. "My world, the world I come from, it has very rigid expectations. For everyone." In that moment, Evelyn saw not Lord Ashford, the imperious patron, but Henry, a man trapped by the very traditions he so staunchly represented. The forbidden passion, once an abstract concept, now had a face, a voice, a startling vulnerability. It was no longer just a fight for recognition. It was a terrifying, exhilarating pull towards the man she was supposed to despise. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of academic fervor and simmering tension of a different kind. The scrolls were transported to the conservation tent, and Evelyn, her father, and a few trusted linguists began the delicate work of translation. Lord Ashford was a constant presence. He had traded his jodhpurs for more practical trousers and often rolled up his sleeves, his forearms tanned and dusted with the same sand as everyone else. He and Evelyn spent long hours together, their heads bent over the fragile papyri. The initial professional respect began to deepen into something more complex. They argued still, but the arguments were now a lively, intellectual dance. "You see this term, Ankh-Emmat?" Evelyn said one evening, pointing to a line of hieratic script. "It doesn't just mean living in truth. In this context, referring to the vizier's judgment, it implies a life in perfect balance, in accordance with a cosmic order he himself helped to administer." Ashford leaned closer, his shoulder brushing hers. A current, now familiar, passed between them. "So it's not merely a philosophical concept, but a description of his function in the state," he mused. "The man was the principle." "Exactly," she exclaimed, turning to him, her face alight. "You see it?" He looked at her, at the intelligent fire in her hazel eyes, at the dust smudged on her cheekbone, and he did not look away. "I am beginning to see a great many things, Evelyn," he said softly. The use of her Christian name hung in the air between them, intimate and charged. The world outside the circle of lamplight seemed to recede. The only sounds were the whisper of the desert and the frantic beating of her own heart. He raised a hand, slowly, and brushed the dust from her cheek with his thumb. The touch was feather-light, but it burned. "Henry," she whispered, a warning and a plea all in one. It was all the invitation he needed. He leaned in and kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a collision of two stubborn, passionate wills, a release of weeks of pent-up frustration, anger, and undeniable attraction. It was the taste of dust and discovery, of forbidden fruit stolen in the shadow of the pyramids. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "This is impossible," Evelyn breathed, pulling away, her hand flying to her lips. "Why?" he challenged, his gray eyes dark with intensity. "Because I am a lord and you are an archaeologist's daughter? Those are titles, Evelyn. They are not who we are." "They are the world we live in," she countered, though her resolve was crumbling. "You are to return to England and marry some suitable debutante. And I am to continue being a forward-thinking inconvenience. You are the most real thing I have ever encountered," he said fiercely, gripping her arms. This is real. What we feel when we uncover history together, what I feel for you now. This is the only truth I care to acknowledge." Their forbidden passion was no longer a concept. It was a living, breathing thing, as tangible as the papyrus scrolls on the table between them. They began a clandestine courtship, conducted in stolen moments under the vast Egyptian sky. They would walk through the ruins of the workman's village at dusk, their fingers secretly intertwined. They shared their dreams, his of the burdens of his estate and the weight of expectation, hers of a world where a woman's intellect was valued as highly as her pedigree. But the world outside their desert bubble had not changed. A letter arrived for Lord Ashford, bearing the seal of his family. His mother, the Dowager Countess, was en route to Egypt, accompanied by Lady Beatrice Croft, the very embodiment of this suitable debutante Evelyn had spoken of. The real world was coming to crash their idyllic, dust-filled paradise. The Dowager Countess of Ashford arrived not as a visitor, but as a conquering general. Her traveling suits were impervious to the desert heat, her posture ramrod straight, and her eyes held the glacial chill of English high society. Lady Beatrice, trailing in her wake, was a vision of pink and white prettiness, all lace and vacant smiles. She looked at the dig site as if it were a particularly messy zoo enclosure. Their presence cast a pall over the camp. The easy camaraderie vanished, replaced by stiff formality. Evelyn was suddenly, painfully aware of her worn trousers, her sun-streaked hair, her lack of a title. She was an outsider in her own home. The confrontation occurred at a painfully formal dinner arranged by Professor Winthrop in a futile attempt at diplomacy. The Dowager fixed Evelyn with a stare that could freeze the Nile. "My dear Miss Winthrop," she said, her voice like the tinkling of fine, sharp icicles. "How industrious you are. It must be so fascinating for you to play at being a scholar. Henry tells us you have a knack for finding things." Evelyn felt her father tense beside her. Henry, seated next to the simpering Lady Beatrice, looked like a man facing the gallows. "I do not play at it, Lady Ashford," Evelyn replied, her voice calm though her knuckles were white where she gripped her napkin. "Archaeology is my life's work." A charming pursuit for a young lady, the Dowager dismissed her with a wave of her hand. "Until, of course, she settles into her proper role. Don't you agree, Henry?" All eyes turned to him. This was the moment. This was where he had to choose between the world of duty and the world of his heart. Evelyn held her breath. Henry's gaze met Evelyn's across the table. She saw the conflict in his eyes, a lifetime of conditioning warring with a newfound, seismic love. He opened his mouth. "Mother," he began, his voice strained. But the Dowager cut him off, her smile predatory. "Beatrice's father has been so generous. He's agreed to the final terms for the merger of the northern estates. The wedding will be the social event of the season." The blow was delivered with surgical precision. Evelyn watched as Henry's shoulders slumped, just slightly, the fight going out of him. He did not look at her again. He gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. The desert, once a place of magic and discovery, had become a prison. The passion she had felt, the words he had whispered, felt like a lie. She had been a diversion, a desert mirage before he returned to the solid, respectable reality of Lady Beatrice. The forbidden passion had not been conquered, it had been crushed under the heel of tradition. That night, Evelyn packed a small bag. She left a note for her father, explaining nothing and everything. She could not stay and watch the man she loved marry another. She could not bear the pitying looks or the Dowager's triumphant sneer. She would take the early morning ferry to Cairo and find passage back to England, to try and forget the taste of desert dust and a kiss that had felt like a promise. The docks in Luxor were chaotic at dawn, swarming with merchants, travelers, and livestock. The air smelled of fish, spice, and coal smoke. Evelyn stood at the railing, watching the sun rise over the Nile, its beauty a painful mockery of the shattered pieces of her heart. She felt hollowed out, a tomb robbed of its treasure. Running away, Miss Winthrop? The familiar, clipped baritone sent a jolt through her entire body. She spun around. Lord Ashford, Henry, stood there, his clothes disheveled, his hair windswept as if he had ridden hard. His gray eyes were blazing. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I read your note. Or rather, your father did and was in a panic. I guessed you would be here." He took a step closer. "You were going to leave without a word? After everything?" "What was there to say?" she shot back, the pain turning to anger. "Congratulations on your upcoming nuptials? I hope you and Lady Beatrice will be very happy discussing the weather and the proper way to pour tea." "I am not going to marry Beatrice," he said, his voice low and intense. Evelyn stared at him, stunned. "Your mother, the estates." "To hell with the estates," he said, his control finally breaking. A few passengers turned to stare. He didn't seem to care. "I spent last night in the tomb in that library where you found the scrolls. I sat there, surrounded by the words of a man who lived his life in service to a truth he believed in. And I realized I have been a coward. I have been living a lie, serving a tradition I don't believe in, to please people whose respect I don't even want." He closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. They were warm and strong. "You were right about everything. About history, about value, about life. You saw the story where I only saw the inventory. You showed me that a life lived in balance, Ankem Mot, is the only life worth living. And my life is only in balance with you in it." Tears streamed freely down Evelyn's face now, cutting clean paths through the dust. "But your title, your family?" "My title is a burden you can help me bear. My family can learn to accept it or they can learn to live without me." He cupped her face, his thumb wiping away her tears. "I love you, Evelyn Winthrop. Not despite your mind but because of it. Not in spite of your passion but for it. I love the dust in your hair and the fire in your eyes. Marry me. Not as Lord Ashford to the archaeologist's daughter, but as Henry to Evelyn. Be my partner. In life and in history." It was the declaration she had never allowed herself to hope for. It was not a proposal of convenience, but a merging of souls, a recognition of equals. Here, on a crowded dock, with the ancient river flowing beside them, the modern world and the ancient one collided in a perfect, harmonious moment. "Yes," she breathed, the word a release, a beginning. "Yes, Henry. 1,000 times yes." He kissed her then, deeply, passionately, and it was a seal on their pact. It was a promise of a future they would write together, a new story uncovered from the sands of the old. 6 months later, the British Museum, London. A crowd had gathered in the hushed, hallowed space of the Egyptian Gallery. The centerpiece of the new exhibition was not a mummy or a golden mask, but a series of papyrus scrolls, carefully displayed under glass. They were titled The Scrolls of the Master of Secrets, Life in the Court of the Pharaoh from the Winthrop Ashford Dig. Standing before the exhibit were Professor Alistair Winthrop, beaming with paternal pride, and the newly married Lord and Lady Ashford. Henry stood tall and proud, his hand resting possessively on the small of Evelyn's back. She was dressed in a fashionable but elegant gown, a world away from her desert trousers, but the intelligent light in her eyes was unchanged. As she looked at the scrolls, her scrolls, translated and celebrated by the entire academic world, she felt a profound sense of completion. They had uncovered more than a tomb, they had uncovered a new understanding of the past. And she had uncovered a love that had defied tradition, a passion that had proven stronger than prejudice. Later that evening, as they left the museum, Henry leaned close to her. "Are you happy, my love?" Evelyn looked up at him, at the man who had thrown away his gilded cage for a life of genuine discovery with her. She thought of the desert sun, the taste of dust, the thrill of the find, and the warmth of his hand in hers. "Ankem Mot," she whispered, smiling. "I am living in truth. And I have never been happier." In the end, the greatest treasure they had unearthed in the Egyptian sands had not been gold or jewels, or even ancient scrolls. It had been each other.